In the past, I have made podcast recordings about the differences between a customer, a client, and a prospect, and why those differences are important. But I'm going to go over that again because I want to introduce a different dimension as to why these distinctions are important. Because it is only when you have asked yourself and you're very clear about who it is that you're talking to that you'll be able to determine what kind of conversations are appropriate going forward and the kind of things that you should be talking about now. So that's also another reason why that question, who are you talking to right now, is really important. Are you talking to a customer? Then these are the kinds of conversations that are appropriate. Are you talking to a client? These are the sorts of conversations you should be having. Are you speaking to a prospect, prospective customer, prospective client? And these are also another set of questions and conversations that you should be having with them. So the distinction is important because it determines the quality and the nature of the future conversations that you are going to have. Now, since I'm going to try and keep things to less than the 10-minute mark, we're not going to go into any detail on those appropriate conversations today. We'll do that in future recordings. Hopefully be able to get it done in maybe 2 or 3 recordings after this. So for now, I will just content myself with going over the definitions of a customer, a client, and a prospective customer or a prospective client. But pretty much whenever you hear someone say prospect in a business context, that is what they mean. They mean a prospective customer, prospective client, someone who could buy from you, reasonably speaking, in the future. So right now we'll just go over the definitions. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, long-time listeners will remember that I don't deal with technically correct definitions on this podcast. I'd rather go with working definitions. Working definitions are just definitions that the everyday man can see, or rather hear, and understand and relate to, even if certain elements of the definition are lacking in a technical sense. So for now, we're just going to concern ourselves with working definitions and not technically correct definitions. So bear that in mind. As for those of you who want to reach out later on to say that when you defined customer or client, you were not correct. So I'm just using working definitions. I'm using everyday definitions. Another reason why I prefer working definitions is not just because they're easy to understand, but then they're easy to remember, so that they can also guide you in your decision making on where to guide the conversations when you're with folks. Because in the beginning of your business journey, at least when you decide to take sales and personal selling a whole lot more serious, in the early days, you're going to spend a lot of time with things you've written out here and there in your jotter, on your phone, little scribbles here and there to guide you. But eventually, over time, you're going to internalize all these scripts, all these talking points, and all these things. So we have to remember them in very easy to recall formats, let me put it that way. So it doesn't help you to have the technically correct definition of customer in your head, because that will require a lot of brain space to have that information stored. But with working definitions, you have these ideas nicely and loosely in your head, and you're going to be able to have an easy and neat framework in your head, so that when you're talking to someone, you can ask yourself, you can figure out, okay, is this person a prospect? Okay, have we crossed over to the customer point, and can I now say that this person is a client? Okay, so on to the definitions. Now, a customer is someone that has bought from you before once, at least once. So that is the definition of a customer, and you will find that that it's kind of close to the technical definition that you're going to find in business books and business material. Now, the difference between a customer and a client, it depends on who you talk to. Some people say a customer has someone that has bought once. A client is someone who buys repeatedly. And then some other people say that the main difference is on the context, the nature of the commercial context. That when you're dealing with a client, you're typically dealing in a much more corporate context, and when you're dealing with a customer, you're dealing with a much more business to consumer orientation. So, me, wedding photographer, dealing with bride, it's okay to say customer. But let's see. But if I sell insurance, for instance, yeah. So let's say I'm an insurance broker, yeah, insurance brokerage, then the people who I have on my roster will be called clients and not customers. So some people say that that is what the main difference is. Although you will find that on this podcast and on the Instagram handle, the sales conversation handles, I use both terms interchangeably. So I talk about customers, I talk about clients. I use them both to mean the same thing. But the bottom line is, you should start. You should start getting it into your mind that there's a difference between someone that has bought from you once and that was the end of the situation, and someone who buys from you repeatedly. The kind of conversations you have, the expectations that you have, and the techniques that you have for continuing the relationship are a whole lot different. So, customer, client, that is easy to understand. Now, prospect, that's where a lot of people have problems, because you're talking to some people and you say this person is a prospect, but then if you give it some more thought, or if someone with more experience asks you a couple of questions, you see that this person is not really a prospect, because if you dig in deep, you'll find that there was absolutely no prospect, pun intended, no prospect of this person buying anytime soon, buying today, buying tomorrow, buying next week. So we have situations where you have a wedding photographer talking with a bride in January. In June, they're still talking. In October, they're still talking. In November, they're still talking. What is it that they're saying? We don't quite know. We just know that they're still talking. And the person thinks, I have a prospect on the books. But if you ask a couple of questions, you see that maybe there's no urgency in the situation, because maybe they haven't fixed a hard wedding date yet. And so you don't really have a prospect. So a prospect is someone who could reasonably be expected to do business with you now or in the foreseeable future. So if you're in one of those situations where you're following up and following up and following up, the endless follow-up cycle, and you have no idea there's no end in sight, then you might not be dealing with a prospect. For customers and clients, it's very easy. They've given you money in the past or repeatedly, so we know who they are. For the prospect, how do we know if the person that we're dealing with is a prospect? That is the reason why all the ideas we've been talking about on the podcast about qualification, that is where they come in handy. You qualify, you ask them questions. So for wedding planners, for instance, I like using wedding planners because wedding planners, according, by the nature of their profession, they have to deal with, what are they called? Gosh, I can't remember what they're called. The list of questions that they carry around with them, checklists. So they have customer. Gosh, I can't remember what it's called. Something checklist. There's a term that most wedding photographers call it. So they have to. Their sales process is pretty much checklist driven. So that's why I like referring to them. So if a wedding planner has a list of 30 questions and asks the bride or the groom before them, and maybe they only get positive answers on 5 out of the 30, then it's easy for the wedding planner to decide that this is not a prospect, there's nothing serious here. So typically, wedding planners will ask questions like, oh, congratulations, are you the bride or the groom? If the person says, oh, no, I'm not the bride, I'm the bride's sister's nephew's cousin, and I'm here to make inquiries on her behalf. Now, the wedding planner might ask a couple of more questions to determine the extent of the person's authority or how the person factors into the decision-making process. So the wedding planner might say something like, that's interesting. How come the bride is not here? And then the person says, oh, well, she was interested, but she's not back on holidays yet. She's still in school in Birmingham, blah, blah, blah. We grew up in the same house. She's my person. She's like a sister to me, blah, blah, blah. You have all those conversations. And those are the kind of things that the wedding planner can use to suss out whether we do have a prospect in front of us, someone that we're talking to, and that it could lead to a sale now or in the foreseeable future, or if this person is just talking BS, or the person is just curious. The person doesn't have anything better to do with their time on a Saturday morning, so they're just going around and looking for places to go and talk at and feel important. So it's a qualification process. That's how you determine whether you have a prospect in front of you or not. So the kind of questions that wedding planners ask will come in very handy in this qualification process. So who are you talking to? Is this the bride? Is this the groom? Have you guys fixed the wedding date? I've noticed that wedding planners also ask about the hall. Initially, I used to think it was because of the decor angle, but I really think it's because wedding planners are trying to figure out, are these people, is there a sense of urgency here? Have they got the ball rolling? So someone who is coming and he's talking, or she is talking, and they're like, oh, we're getting married, and it could be in 2021, or maybe 2022, we don't know, because the families have to meet, and then Umuna has to talk, and then this and this and that and that. So depending on the answers you've gotten to other questions, this might be a prospect or it might not. But if someone says, yes, I'm the bride, we're getting married October 1st, we've booked the venue, and it is in Okudili Hotel in Maitama, room B. Now, in that kind of situation, now you know that, okay, now you're dealing with people that are serious. They've got the ball rolling. Date has been fixed. The venue is there. They've even paid the deposit. There's some urgency. The ball is moving. We are dealing with a prospect. So that's how you figure out who a prospect is. If you want to know more about the whole process of qualification, then skip back a couple of episodes. Just look in the titles. Anything that has to do with qualifications, if you listen there, you'll find some more ideas about this. But also, if you have any friends who are wedding planners, then hang around with them and you'll get a good sense of the kind of questions that they ask. Those are very good qualification questions for you to figure out whether you're dealing with a prospect or not. Because if you spend a lot of time just giving your pricing information or emailing your brochure or whatever it is to everybody who calls, you're going to be wasting a lot of time, because not everybody who calls and says, hey, you're a wedding planner, how much, what are your packages? It's not everybody that has a right, or rather that deserves to have access to that kind of information. You need to figure out if you're speaking to a prospect or a tire kicker or a time waster. So, customer, client, how do we know who they are? Your bank statement will tell you that, depending on the number of pings that you have received from them. That's how you know whether it's a customer or a client, or the context of the relationship, whether this is whether this is a more corporate kind of thing, or it's a more personal type of situation. And then for a prospect, since we haven't received a deposit, how are you going to know who the prospect is? Well, that determines on how many good answers that they give you to the question. So if the person that you're talking to is the bride's cousin's younger sister, but they didn't grow up together, but she was sent there by her auntie to come and make inquiries because the bride just got proposed to, and they might be interested to have the wedding hold in Abuja, or they might not. It might be in the UK, or it could be back in the East, or there are just too many ifs, and it's not a very tidy and clean link between all the information that we need. So for me, it would be one of those kind of situations that I would just I just jump over, because you end up just wasting your time and gassing yourself up. In fact, I had one of those experiences quite early when I started out as a wedding photographer. Someone called from Ghana, and we kept on chatting. He was the best man of the groom, so he was the best man but no relation, and I'm sure you guys know that the conversation went nowhere, because let's face it, if the person called and was the groom's younger brother, for instance, or older brother, you can see that the person is close to the decision-making unit, and perhaps that is a much more relevant bit of information to have than someone on the bridal train. I mean, how do you know that they have authority to talk about or negotiate on behalf of the bride or of the groom? Anyway, not to belabor the issue because we've already gone past the 10-minute mark. Qualification, how do you know who's a prospect? It's a qualification process. So listen to older episodes to get some more gist about that. Use the Google machine, get a sense of other questions you can ask, or just hook up with a friendly wedding planner near you, or any of the wedding planner trainings that go on in Lagos and Abuja, and you'll be able to get a good list of questions, part of your questionnaire, so that you can weed through who is a prospect and who is not. So thank you very much, guys, for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based event and wedding photographer, Tavishima Ayede. I'll catch you guys at the next conversation, where we will now look into detail what kind of conversations are appropriate, or what kind of conversations should you be aiming for when you're speaking to a customer, when you're speaking to a client, or when you are speaking with a prospect. So thank you very much, guys, for listening. I'll catch you at the next recording.